delighted to have Bob Hicok with us here this evening. We're really big fans of his work, so we're happy to get him to come up. As others have said, Elizabeth Gaffney in the New York Times said his judicious eye imbues even the dreadful with beauty and meaning. And if you've read some of his work, I think that you'll agree. Bob Hicok is the author of, most recently, Insomnia Diary from 2004, Animal Soul 2001, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, Flesh Shipping is from 1998, and The Legend of Light in 1995, which won the 1995 Felix Pollak Prize in Poetry, and was named in 1997 ALA Book List Notable Book of the Year. His new book, This Clumsy Life, will appear next spring from the University of Pittsburgh Press, and it's my privilege to introduce Bob Hicok.
I feel a religious conversion coming on, and I don't know why. I've written a lot of not very nice poems about my father, and I wanted to write a kind poem about my father. This poem is called Oh My Papa. Our fathers have formed a poetry workshop. They sit in a circle of disappointment over our fastballs and wives. We thought they didn't read our stuff. Whole anthologies of poems that begin, My father never, or those that end, and he was silent as a carp, or those with middles which, if you think of the right side as a sketch, look like a paunch of beer and worry, but secretly, with flashlights in the woods, they've read every word and noticed that our 9 happy poems have balloons and sex and giraffes inside, but not one dad waving hello from the top of a hill at dusk. Theirs is the revenge school of poetry, with titles like My Yellow Sheet Lad, and Given Your Mother's Taste for Vodka, I'm Pretty Sure You're Not Mine. They're not trying to make the poems better so much as sharper or louder, more like a fishhook or electrocution. As a group, they overcome their individual senilities, their complete distaste for language, how cloying it is, how like tears it can be. And remember every mention of their long hours at the office or how tired they were when they came home, when they were dragged through the door by their shadows. I don't know why it's so hard to write a simple and kind poem to my father, who works not like a dog. Dogs sleep most of the day in a ball of wanting to chase something, but like a man with 7 kids and a house to feed, whose absence was his presence, his present. The Cheerios, the Pia Flyers, who taught me things about trees, that they're the most intricate version of standing up, who built a grandfather clock with me so I would know that time is a constructed thing, a passing, ticking fancy, a bomb that'll go off soon for him, for me. And I notice in our father's poems a reciprocal dwelling on absence, that they wonder why we disappeared as soon as we got our licenses, why we wanted the rocket cars, as if running away from them to kiss girls who looked like mirrors of our mothers wasn't fast enough. And it turns out they did start to say something, to form the words hey or stay. But we'd turned into a door full of sun, into the burning leaf, and were gone before it came to them that it was all right to shout, that they should have knocked us down with a hand on our shoulders, that they too are mystified by the distance men need in their love. email some time ago from someone who teaches about a student of his committing suicide. This is called In Michael Robbins's Class -1. At the desk where the boy sat, he sees the Chicago River. It raises its hand. It asks if metaphor should burn. He says fire is the basis for all forms of the mouth. He asks, why did you fill the boy with your going? I didn't know a boy had been added to me, the river says. Would you have given him back if you knew? I think so, the river says. I have so many boys in me. I'm worn out, stroking eyes, looking up at the day. Have you written a poem for us? He asks the river, and the river reads its poem. And the other students tell the river, it sounds like a poem the boy would have written. But they smell the boy's cigarettes in the poem. They feel his teeth biting the page. And the river asks, did this boy dream of horses? Because I suddenly dream of horses. I suddenly dream. They're in a circle, and the river says, I've never understood round things. Why would leaving come back to itself? And a girl makes a kiss with her mouth and leans it against the river. And the kiss flows away, but the river wants it back. The river makes sounds to go after the kiss. And they all make sounds for the river to carry to the boy. And the river promises to never surrender the boy's shape to the ocean. I want to retitle all of these poems triptych at this moment. This poem is called The Travelers. The man had worked very hard for the boat. He didn't know how to sail, wanted only to sit on the boat and sleep on the boat and have water brush against his sleep. His son was bothered by this. He wanted the sails to go up and be filled with wind, so he bought his father lessons. His father learned well and one day sailed off. He was gone so long, the son worried that his father had died. The son, looking at his own son, decided he needed to spend more time at home. The two of them built a toy boat, and the son of the son asked if they could carve a version of the father of his father, who they glued in place behind the wheel. When the man returned, they gave him the boat with the little wooden hymn in it. He told them stories about the places he'd been. The son of the son, hearing so much about waves and mountains along the shore, announced that he was going to be a sailor. The man had actually been just one town away, sitting on his boat and sleeping on his boat, reading novels of adventure and romance. When his son noticed him looking to sea, he asked if his father was thinking of someone he'd met. Yes, he was, the father said, a woman, and left his son to imagine what he would. There was a woman, Carol. She drove over several times a week. They grilled steaks and watched baseball, made slow, brittle-hipped love, and listened to gulls when they should be sleeping. When the boat was gone, the son assumed that his father had sailed off to die. It made him feel like a Viking to believe this, or something wild and large. A bear. A bear would do that, he told his son. When his son looked this up, he found no evidence that a bear would do that. By then, he wanted to be an astronomer. He'd seen pictures of what the universe looked like and wanted to go there, wherever there was. My wife recently got an endoscopy, which is...
See what?
My wife recently had an endoscopy. This poem is about that.
What is an endoscopy?
They put a tube down your throat and take a look at your stomach.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I don't recommend one if you can avoid it. This is called After the Procedure. All the apples have been washed. I sprayed every apple with a liquid that cleans pesticides away. I prayed very leap myself with a quid that kneels pesty vices away. On the counter, pictures of my wife's stomach, her esophagus and duodenum, A-OK, her inner life, while she sleeps drugs on the couch, while she rugged peels know the slouch. The worm crawled in, took pictures, endoscopy. The sun comes in, warms my eyes, drops bits of far away against my looking. I am grateful, she fully great. She will rise and be herself, a dash inside out, invaded, but here and projected in that state to remain. I am thinking soup. I, Ma, thin king of dew, do make lunch, wash dishes, do inspect her breath. It is there, the up and down. I kiss her paper esophagus. Intimacy evolves. Intimacy solves. I never expected love. All the apples have been washed. This poem is called String Theory. If you had enough of it, and because some spider webs are stronger than the same diameter of steel, you could tie every single thing together in a great loop of telepathy, granting credence to your feeling that our shirts have been carrying on a conversation at a distance, as you yourself have felt that star, the big one grinning in the east. Shoot an arrow smack dab from its brilliance to your forehead, where your third eye should be, but has roamed, as eyes will, away from this putative home, even granting that you have licked the string and slipped your trifocals on. It's impossible to thread the needle the first time, because even the second knot will fail, as the lines between us grow slack. So we tighten them in bed, winding each other up with the gears of our mouths and wheels of our hands. When like tops we go crashing about the furniture of our cities, while running out of conjunctions, the breaths that attach. And you forget the one on your finger saying, remember. Or cutting them, the balloons rise, the kites go limping off into space, taking the dragons of our souls away, which breathe fire is the theory, or nothing is the notion. And I agree, absolutely, that I can make sense of how everything holds together by buying that ball of sky blue yarn and holding it to my face and trusting this is how up smells. This is how it feels to have your wings embraced. Whereas the math of this is difficult, the feel of any one exuberance is encoded in my willingness to dance stupidly, to thrash as if the hand puppeting above me is drunk, is mine, and some nobody is pulling hard in every direction at the same time. So torn am I between kiss me and fuck off. Do you too always feel differently the same? For 2 days I've been saying, that's just the way I roll. Try things on is a good philosophy. And look outside yourself is advice that smells of lilac in the morning. I would experiment with a tractor for my heart if I could. The blood plowing, the rooting around for love. It's embarrassing though. Are you sure you don't want the medium fries for a penny more? That's just the way I roll. Why don't you crawl off and die? That's just the way I roll. Daddy-o was before my time. I was born into far out, psychedelic man. But the vernacular rejected my tongue. Cool was as hip as I got, but everyone says cool. Our grandmothers, Caesar. I can hear Manson. It was cool how they begged for their lives. Revolutionary. Such tiny changes as using the red cup for coffee, as sleeping sideways on the bed. Then there's sharing, noticing all the chicken noodle soup I have. Then there's not swatting the fly because any killing's the beginning of all killing. But when I open the door to let it out, 2 more come in. Like nature or God, whatever, is saying, that's just the way I roll, fuckboy. And so I've named them. That one's Ellen, and that's Kaisha, and the one flying upside down is Frank O'Hara, who I warn when he lands on the lampshade, never take the dune buggy ride. Do you know flies fly backward? It's tragic that out of the billions there have been, not one fly with its sesame seed brain has ever thought, cool, I'm flying backward. Maybe next I'll fly inside out until I'm pretty as a bee. We don't get to know what we don't know. Like right now, every other direction this poem could have gone is lost to me. Like this, the Orioles are saying copacetic. Or this, the night was a cliche of crickets and humping. I know that dirge. I am that applause, the grinding, the slapping of thighs against ecstasy. And a Mobius strip begins life as a flat piece of paper, a line. But add a twist, a bit of glue, and we have no idea where beginning ends or ending begins. And maybe they don't. I'm going to end with a poem called Beasts. Everyone's ordering pan-seared this and foie gras that. Most of the crowd's down from the symphony. Mahler, I think. Four Tops, mostly. Waiters pushing smiles between tables and laughter. The woodward side of the restaurant's all glass. It's snowing a bit. The flakes too small for the innocence we ask of the season. Across the street, the red brick Art Council building has a steer or lion in front of it. I can't tell in the dark which animal is sculpted and out of what. Paper mache or stone. Just north of this unknown zoo, Hurley's Wigs has no door, no windows, has a name in fading paint. More things have closed than opened in 40 years in Michigan. You could get rich selling plywood, nails, forgetting. I order a Glenlivet, crab cakes and shrimp. I'm happy to add Scotland, the ocean, to my body. In an hour, $5,000 will be spent in this restaurant. A woman at my table leans toward a man in black with silver hair at the end of the bar. She tells me he's a cellist. His nose is in a glass of Cabernet. I want to ask if he dreams in music, if he'd die without his hands. A woman walks by outside. Her coat is made for spring. She looks in and sees me looking out. These are not eyes we have, but gates. She is old, and I think of her inside one of the Rodins I just visited at the Detroit Institute of Arts. He was accused of casting real people inside his sculptures, and I'm certain she was one of them, killed and kept alive by beauty. I'm always knocking against myself to get out. More of the day collapses into this moment of waiting for bread. I'm back to this morning with Carl on the sidewalk. The sky is gray and pregnant with snow. He weaves his hands in and out of each other in his coat pockets. In the 3 years I've been away, he's obtained fear. It's below his eyes. The skin is sagging and brown. He has 2 smokes going, a man of fire, one on the sidewalk, one burning to knuckles. We're talking the best ways to kill ourselves. I suggest chopping parts of my body away and feeding them to an old-fashioned meat grinder until I'm just a left hand turning a handle. I'm not serious, but Carl is, because he's about to drive 400 miles to work a week at $7 an hour packing crates so he can drive home to that not being enough and watch men who look like refrigerators wearing heads haul parts of his life away. Carl's my age. We work nights in a foundry, orange flowing steel and orange-tipped cigarettes, whiskey on break under the so many stars. He'd been a fullback at Stevenson. He could lift everything. I saw him do it. The world on his back, shift after shift. That was his genius, to ignore gravity. I'm trying once more to explain tenure, to convince him that the 6 weeks I have to myself between semesters isn't a layoff. I gotta get me some of that, he says again, lighting a smoke with a smoke. I remind him I was once lowered into a sewer on a rope to unstick a valve. I don't tell him I traveled to the cave, thought to have inspired Dante. An unremarkable whole suggesting how plain misery can be. I'm visiting Michigan after 3 years in Western Virginia. Having worked for 20 years in the automotive industry, I now teach creative writing. I long ago gave up trying to explain poetry to people like Carl, and have recently given up trying to explain people like Carl to professors. I can't explain to Carl why I'll go to the museum for the Rodin and Claudel exhibit when I could be watching football. I can't explain to most professors why I understand Carl's reservations when the Colts are on TV and undefeated. This is just one of the impossibilities of being American. There's so much black to explain to white, to woman, to man, to Christian, to Jew, and so little listening. There's so much money going places only money knows. There's so much tearing down to build, to tear down, to forget there was anything to remember. I remember a man lighting himself on fire in Woodhaven stamping. I remember the first time I met an Art Deco building. I remember working 12-hour days for a year. I remember Phil Olson calling Hemet Toma a raghead. I remember thinking Nietzsche would have been a horrible first baseman. I remember the sinews of MLK's dreaming voice. I remember touching the moon through the Magnavox. The bread still hasn't come, and now I remember Carl leaning back and putting his hand on WPA chiseled into the sidewalk. He asks what that means, and I tell him, and he says he likes the idea of building a bridge or anything that lasts. A few hours later, I'm looking at Rivera murals in the museum and noticing the red star on the glove of a worker. The murals were painted in the early 30s, before Americans completely gave up on communism. Rivera believed in equality of man and fucking whoever he wanted. I believe in Carl 5 hours away on I-94, screaming along to Stairway to Heaven. The only place that Carl exists with Rivera is in my head. Therefore, I am a universe full of underemployment and frescoes. A universe featuring the Forward Pass and anaphora and museums, which are fortresses of beauty. I wanted Rodin to tell me something about the disappearance of health insurance. I wanted Rivera to make people believe in sharing. The woman has crossed the street and taken her eyes with her. Not hearing her reminds me of how quiet looking is in a museum. In each room, maybe 10 people stared at the sculptures, their expressions serious engines. I enjoyed the studies more than the cast works. A clay face of torment the size of a thumb. 4 plaster heads on which Rodin worked out the sacrificial mouth of Paul Visant. My favorite was a plaster mask of Claudel, to which he attached a left hand that flows out of the back of her skull and curls around, the ring finger touching her forehead just barely and wistful. It was worth the backache of standing for hours on marble to walk away with the flower of that image, to realize that language is a torso trying to writhe free of my lips. Finally, the waitress. Finally, bread. 4 people chewing, bottomless. Thank you very much for listening.